Hey YouTubers, today got another video for you guys working on my 2010 Q5, and the problem is that my rotors, my front rotors, more specifically my front passenger rotor, has become ever so slightly warped. If you've ever experienced a warped rotor, then you know that it's really annoying because you get that vibration in the steering wheel whenever you brake. And so I'm gonna have to change it, but I'm also going to show you guys what happens when a rotor warps. I'm pretty sure I'm not going to be able to illustrate it on the rotor itself because the warpage is actually really slight. Like, you know, it doesn't vibrate really bad. I'm going to show you guys a video on that, but I'm going to try my best to illustrate what happens when a rotor warps and why it is that I never get my rotors turned. When my rotors get warped, I change them. Invariably, I change them. I don't ever get my rotors turned, and I'm going to explain to you guys and show you guys why it is that I do that. But first, we're going to get into getting the tire off and getting the rotor off of the car, and then we'll go into that. So as usual, if you like the videos I make, click like so you know, so I know you like them, and if you want to see more of the same when I make them, hit subscribe. Let's get into it. Bad rotors. Brakes, no brakes. Brakes, no brakes. Brakes. So that may not seem like a whole lot to you guys, but trust me, it's enough to annoy the piss out of me. First thing we have to do here, obviously, is take the wheel off. I got my new tires on here, my Falcon Wild Peak AT Trails, not to be confused with the AT3s. Absolutely love these new tires. I'm going to do a review on them sometime this week, but I'm going to take this tire off. First I'm going to jack the car up, put it on a jack stand, take the tire off, and I'm going to show you guys the process in removing the caliper and the caliper bracket. So when you're changing the brakes, you can remove just the caliper to get the pads off, but if you're removing the rotor, almost every single time you have to remove the bracket also, so there's different levels to this. But I'm going to get the tire off, and then I'm going to bring you guys in nice and tight so you can see what it is that I'm doing here. Alright, so back here we have, well, first of all, in the front here, let me show you. So this is the caliper, this big piece. On a lot of vehicles there's a big cutout there so that you can access the piston if you needed to pull it out for service or cleaning or whatever. This one doesn't have that. It works fine. The piston actually has enough travel that you could get it all the way out without having that recess in this design. Most of them have the design. This one doesn't. Works the same. On the outside there's this piece. That is the bracket that holds the caliper. So the caliper, when the piston contracts, since it only pushes on one side, this entire caliper is able to float. This is called a floating caliper. So it slides side to side to center it on the rotor, and then it slides on this bracket. The bracket and the caliper have to come off, because if I remove just the caliper, the rotor won't be able to come off. It's still going to be held in by this bracket. I won't be able to pull it forward far enough to get it out. So both of them have to come out. Sometimes you can remove both of them at once. Sometimes you have to remove the caliper and then remove the bracket. So back here, you will see there are the sliding pins, which are these bolts, this one and this one. You can usually see they're kind of small. They have rubber because they have a sliding pin that has lubricant in there, and you want to keep it sealed up so it doesn't seize up on you and your brakes start wearing unevenly. And then behind that, let me see if I can focus on it, but behind that is the bracket bolt. The bracket bolt is much bigger. It has to hold the entire assembly, and again, two bolts. There's one on the top and one down on the bottom. And so what we're shooting for today is a bracket, so I'm going to take out those big bolts and then remove the entire assembly and hang it up safely somewhere on the suspension so it's not hanging off the brake line. And then in the front, that looks like a T30 Torx, but once I remove that, there should be nothing holding this this rotor onto the spindle. So the process is I'm going to remove this assembly, hang it up safely, remove that Torx, and then rotor should just come out, which you can tell by the look of it. It's seen better days. There's hot spots, like this area is darker than this area, you know, and it's just worn out. So let me get to removing this caliper assembly, and then we'll go from there. The bracket bolt is a 21 millimeter. So I'm gonna remove that, but first let me get a piece of wire ready, because once this comes off, it's heavy and it's kind of cumbersome to handle. So I'm gonna have a piece of wire ready here so that when I take this off, I could just hang it on there and it'll be out of the way. You don't have to have an impact to take that off. It'll come off with a ratchet and a little bit of elbow grease, but there is no denying the convenience of having a ratchet and just being able to zoop that off of there. I have to pry the brake pads back just a little bit to escape the lip that has formed on this rotor so that I can get it off. Not a big deal. Just put a big screwdriver in there, put a little bit of force like that, and it comes right off. Really straightforward. And then I take my wire, put it through the caliper, like so. That's out of the way. Side note, if you ever wanted to paint your calipers, make them look really nice and pretty, this would be the perfect time to do it, because then you can just put a plastic bag over this assembly, paint your caliper. You're not worried about getting overspray on your rotor because you're going to change it out, so that's irrelevant. And then when you put it all back together, it's going to look nice and cute. So this would be a good time to do that. I'm not doing that. I don't care. Now I got to get I think it's a T30 Torx, and put it in here. Let me go get my Torx. It might not be a 30. I might just be talking a lot of stuff that I don't know about. It absolutely is a 30. The reason I keep putting these gloves on, not just to keep my hands clean, but also because these brake parts, I've been driving around, these components are all very hot to the touch. You don't want to try to handle this after you just pulled over. It makes it hard. So that's why I got gloves on. That broke off. That broke loose really easy. I like that, because a lot of times brake components, they're in there, you know, they're committed. So the fact that this one, I was even with a small 1/4 inch ratchet, it just popped loose really easy. And there it is, just a little T30 screw that goes into here and holds the rotor. So it holds the rotor lined up with the holes that are on the spindle where the wheel bolts onto, because I've seen older designs. I think my older Audis didn't have that screw, and so you would have to line up the rotor with the holes and then line up the wheel with the rotor with the holes to get it to line up. It was a pain. This design is much better, relatively speaking. So this, it doesn't want to come out. It's not just coming out like that, so I'm gonna get a hammer and I'm gonna hit it along the edge to break it loose. If you were reusing this rotor, which I am not, you wouldn't really want to do that. That would not be the best course of action. But since I absolutely do not care about this rotor anymore, I can whack the bejesus out of it. We're gonna have to work out the big hammer hack. Well, the big hammer hack worked. It worked very well. That's a heavy rotor. For now, I'm just gonna put one of these bolts in here. Just keep it from falling down. Yeah, that works. All right, let's go over to the rotor and the table, and I'll show you guys what I got. This is the rotor that came off, and you can see there's a lip right here. I don't know if you can see it or not, but trust me, there's a lip right here, and there's a lip right here. This entire surface has been worn in tremendously. Also, there's a bunch of grooves. Looks like an LP record. That's bad. Same thing on this side. Lots and lots of grooves. And that ridge where it's worn in here and worn in here, which is why I had to pry the pads back to get the caliper off of the rotor. But more importantly, it's warped. So it has become, there are areas that have become extremely heated to where it's become kind of wavy. So that when you apply the brakes, when you're slowing down from a decent speed, the whole steering wheel shakes. And there are multiple problems with that. First of all, it's annoying. Second of all, it will cause premature wear on your brakes. Third of all, that shaking vibration that you get really bad, that's hard on your suspension components. Mostly your tie rods, inner and outer tie rods, get a lot of stress from that shaking, and you will end up with premature wear on your inner and outer tie rods. And then you got to buy tie rods and install them, and then you got to get an alignment because of the tie rod. So the whole thing spirals out of control. So if you get that vibration when applying the brakes to where you have warped rotors, I highly recommend you change your rotors. You don't have them turned, and I'm going to show you guys why you don't turn your rotors right now. Alright, so I wish I had a whiteboard. I need to buy a whiteboard so that I can do some illustrations for you guys. Sometimes I want to show you stuff that I can't really show you practical, but I'm going to show you theoretical. So anyway, the short version of the story is this. So this is your rotor. If you're looking at it from the front, it has one rotor on, one disc on one side, one disc on the other side, and then there are a bunch of slats joining the two. Okay, and what happens is that when your rotors become warped, there's excessive heat unevenly distributed on the disc, and it causes the disc to become bent or wavy. If you've ever seen an old record that got a little too hot and it started to get wavy and stuff, that's what happens. So it ends up getting wavy, and then when you get your rotors turned, Well, there's no way to fill in the low spots when you turn your rotors. What you do is you cut out the high spots. So you end up with a rotor where there are areas that are low, and then there are areas, well, all areas are the same height, but you end up with a rotor where there are areas that are thin, and then there are areas that are thick. So hold on a second, let me get another Sharpie so I can show you guys. Alright, so I got two Sharpies now. Hopefully this illustration will make it clear what it is I'm trying to show you. But anyway, the rotor is the same thickness throughout. So in a perfect world, this would be your rotor. So this would be one side and this would be the other side, okay? And it's perfectly straight. What happens when it gets warped is it becomes wavy. So instead of being perfectly straight, you would end up with something like this. So that it's not a perfectly straight line. There are high areas and low areas. Well, if this is the outside and you're turning the rotor, because it's a vented rotor, there's no way to cut the inside of it. You can cut the outside of one disc and the outside of the other disc, but you can't cut the insides of the disc, which that would be even worse. But anyway, now that it's wavy, when you get your rotors turned, what they do is they pick the lowest spot and they cut out all the high spots so that the low spot is all that remains. So that we don't lose track of what's going on here. So this is a good rotor. It's perfectly straight. This is a bad rotor. It's wavy. So when they put a lathe on it and cut out all of the high spots, all you end up with is the low spots, but you end up with low spots that are evenly spaced like that. Well, the problem is that now you have areas where it's thick and areas where it's thin, and thick and thin and thick. This is thin, and now the problem has become exaggerated, because now when you first get your rotors cut or lathe, whatever you want to call it, they drive smooth and they work perfectly fine. But now you have areas that are thin that have already suffered from thermal expansion, and now that they're thin and they cannot absorb as much energy, they suffer from more thermal expansion. So you get your rotors cut, they're going to work fine for, you know, maybe a couple months, and then it's going to start warping again, but it's going to warp even worse than before. And that's why you don't ever get your rotors cut. I mean, if it's a super heavy duty, something like, you know, an F250 where there's a lot of mass and you can cut it and the difference in thickness is negligible, fine. But on a passenger car where these discs are already as thin as the manufacturer can get away with, you cut them down, you're gonna run into problems really fast. So if the rotors originally lasted, let's say, 2 years, and you get them cut, you'll be lucky to get 6 months out of them after the fact. So yeah, it's cheaper than buying new rotors, but it ends up causing more problems than it solves. And that's why I never ever get my rotors cut. I always buy new rotors. Now, let me open up this box and show you guys what I bought, which obviously you can tell by the smiley face, I got it on Amazon. So let's get into the box. Here comes the way. These are original Brembo brakes. That's right. I've always said in my other videos, if I can afford to get OEM quality or better, I go for it. I don't ever cheap out, especially when you consider that the only thing keeping you from the car in front of you is your brakes. So, Brembo, baby. That's my flex today. Move this big box out of the way. I think there was an option for cross-drilled rotors, but I don't remember that that's what I got. I'm pretty sure I did not get the cross-drilled rotors, which for my usage, they wouldn't benefit me, so I don't care. Oh, well, we have a problem. We have a very serious problem because I ordered 2 and they sent me 1. I mean, it's really nice looking. It's a nice looking dimpled one, but it's only 1. So I'm gonna go on Amazon and look at what I ordered and make absolutely sure that I got, because it's saying 2, and even on this it says 2 boxes, but there's only 1 box and there's only 1 rotor. So we got a problem. I'm gonna have to call Amazon. These things can never go right. So that was kind of interesting. I opened the box, 1 box with 1 rotor in there. That's not gonna help me. For me, rotors are like shoes. So even though only 1 side is warped and shuttering, I'm gonna change both sides. I'm not gonna change 1 side. You don't buy 1 shoe. Anyway, a real quick call to Amazon. They were able to rectify it. They're gonna send me a replacement rotor, so I'm gonna have the 2 of them. I just don't have 2 right now. I have 1 right now. So fortunately for me, I jacked up and disassembled the side that's warped, and so I'm gonna take care of my problem as far as the rotor being warped today. My replacement is not gonna be here till Wednesday because it's Memorial Day weekend and things aren't gonna be shipped out on Monday. So I'm not gonna get the replacement till Wednesday. I'm probably not gonna change it till next week, Friday or something like that. But the short version of the story is that we're only changing 1 rotor today, the one that I'm showing you guys. And then when the other one comes, then I'll deal with that one when it shows up. So let's get into the tail end of the video. I'm gonna put the 2 rotors side by side, show you what I had, show you what I got, and then reassembly process, which is really simple and straightforward, and that'll be it for today. So this is what I got. Nice shiny rotor. It's got a little bit of dust on it from handling it with my dirty hands. Even though I wore gloves, I took my gloves off to make the phone call to Amazon, get this taken care of. It's dimpled, so it's not drilled, it's dimpled. The holes, these are dimples, and they don't go all the way through. Don't care. I wouldn't care if it wasn't even drilled at all. That's fine with me. I don't drive sporty. It's an SUV. I'm not gonna drive this thing crazy or anything like that. Don't care. I laid them one on top of the other so that the bolt holes, make sure the bolt holes line up. They do line up. Everything lines up perfectly. This is the illustration I was showing you guys earlier with there's 1 disc and then there are all these pieces inset that hold the discs together, and then the other disc. So when you're lathing it, you can cut this side, you can cut this side, you can't cut the inside. So you end up with thin and thick spots, and so that's why if it's a little bit warped and you cut it, it's going to be smooth for a while, but then it warps even worse when it comes around second time around. So that's why I never even mess with that. Pretty straightforward. This is nice and smooth. It doesn't have that lip that this has on the edge, on the inner and outer edge. And that's just a product of wear. You know, it's just, it wore out. It's been on there since 2009. This is the original Audi part. So 2010. But the car was manufactured in 2009, so it's been on there since 2009. But the point is, this is old. It's 15 years old. That's why it's worn out. There's no way around it. Like, it is a friction surface. It's getting worn out every single time you press the brakes. There's no way around this wearing out. It's time for a new one. I'm gonna put this one on, put the put my caliper back on, and then the tire, and that'll be it. So the difficult part was, I mean, there wasn't really any difficult part. It's removing bolts and nuts and then taking this off. You know, I had to hit it a couple times with a sledgehammer, but considering that it's been on there for 15 years, a couple whacks is not bad. I mean, there's been times when I had to take a blowtorch to one of these bad boys. So in the grand scheme of things, I think I got off easy. So I'm going to show you guys the video of reassembly. I'm going to fast forward that piece. You don't need to see all of that. It's kind of tedious, and it's pretty much the opposite of removal, and that'll be it. With this rotor, they gave me a Phillips head screw. I'm going to reuse the T30 Torx because if this ever gets seized in there, it's a lot easier to put some strain on a T30 Torx than it is on a Phillips head screwdriver, Phillips head screw. So a little bit of hindsight and foresight here going on. Alright, now just put on the caliper and then I can put the wheel back on. This is one of the easiest jobs that you can do on your car, is changing the rotor. It looks kind of daunting, and I mean, I've seen mechanics charge upwards of $200 to do one of these jobs, but if I wasn't doing the illustration part showing you guys what happens, I'd be in and out of here in under an hour. Always make sure you get your bolts started by hand before you start tightening on them, especially if you're using an impact like I am. So you don't want to cross thread this. It'll ruin your day. Alright, that's the job. I'm going to straighten up this wheel, put the tire back on, and I'm out of here. That actually looks pretty cool in there. I've never really been a fan of cross-drilled and slotted rotors, but there's no denying the cool factor. Now that I've seen it like that, I should have painted the caliper. Oh well, it's done.